Hello, everybody, and welcome to an exciting discussion-style, podcast-style video where I'm joined by Beard, the prolific Arkham Horror designer who did such things as Alice in Wonderland and Cyclopean Foundations and Half-Life and Circus Ex Mortis and Arkham Incident. There's just so many. There's so many. I was looking for a video to talk about, and Beard said you should talk about campaign mechanics and if they should return, and I was like, Beard, do you want to join? And you did, so hi, Beard, how's it going?
Hi, I'm doing just fine. This is going to be a fun time.
Yeah, we just got to talk about design. One of my favorite things to do. This is something that for people... this is something that I've wanted to do with Travis and Bryn too, so this is something that I'll likely, also get with them involved, but that's why I'm happy you're here, Beard, because this is a different perspective as well that we have, because you've designed so much Arkham as well, that you're going to be adding kind of like that flair to the conversation, which I think is pretty exciting.
I still have yet to talk with those two face to face.
Yeah, they don't come out much. They only come out on like Wednesdays from like 4 until 10. That's the only time that they really actually exist. I just take them out of their hibernation pods, and it's all that.
They sound like a flower. It only blooms once a year.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate. So what we did is with my chat and Beard, we kind of just pulled out some of the I'm going to call them kind of like key mechanics, because there's a lot of smaller mechanics. Like, for example, in the Forgotten Age, there was Alert. There was Patrol that I'm pretty sure first showed up in the Excelsior Hotel, and has since kind of just like popped up in other places. Those are like, in Magic the Gathering, they have these things called evergreen effects. An example of that is like flying. So flying is a card effect that, creatures with flying can only block creatures with flying. It just kind of exists, and it's like it's an evergreen. It's just like always there. And I think at this point, cards like effects like Alert and all that are considered to be like evergreen in Arkham Horror. They can just be used whenever. But this other stuff, it's either like shown up a few times or has only shown up in that one campaign. So we're going to be using that as kind of our discussion point with the thesis of, should they revisit campaign mechanics in future campaigns, or is the design space kind of too limited, or does it kind of eat into the other campaigns? So before we get into it, I think each of us should just answer kind of just like our general thought on the thesis before we get any deeper. So I'm going to start with you, Beard. Do you think that they should reuse like key campaign mechanics in future campaigns?
Yes and no. It's difficult for me to say, because like if they revisit Doubt and Conviction from Carcosa, I think people are going to say, well, this is just chasing the coattails of one of the most popular campaigns rather than trying to do a new thing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you could revisit like supplies from Forgotten Age. I don't think anyone would blink an eye. They're just saying, oh, this is coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm kind of there with you, that there are some that I think are just like built into the identity of the campaign. Like, for example, Doubt and Conviction is a great one. The Vengeance, I think, is another one. I don't think like the design space on Vengeance is pretty limited in terms of like as a campaign thing. Or even like Tekalilis in Edge of the Earth are another example of that. However, I agree, there are some things that I think if they were revisited in multiple ways, they could be good enough to explore in depth. And also there could be a lot of cool discoveries that come with them. I think this is something that I've even actually said to custom content creators, where like taking ideas that with like, you should still check with the original creator. I think it's just like the normal thing to do, but they should explore other custom content creating mechanics. And also I would love to see like custom content creators work with like flood tokens or like frost tokens and see what they can come up with, and it translates that to official product as well.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, because I'd love to see like the dark matter scan used again. It'd have to be completely different context, because I think another sci-fi campaign in the same vein would be too similar, but maybe they could use something similar reflavored.
Yeah.
Or make something else based on it. Or like if somebody else used an effect similar to non-Euclidean from Cyclopean.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, reflavor that to fit whatever campaign you're doing.
Yeah, because really the reality is that like Arkham has a lot of design space. So a lot of games, they're like measured by how much design space they have, whether they are like deep like the ocean or shallow like a puddle, right? And Arkham is incredibly deep. There's so many moving pieces. So there's no reason why someone couldn't discover something. Even though I said like Vengeance is probably pretty limited on an official standpoint, I think that there's a lot of things that people could discover with Vengeance in a custom campaign that you wouldn't see in an official campaign.
I mean, even they reiterated it on a little bit when they did the return set with like the 3 guys that go to the victory display until they're all dealt with.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I also agree with what Superfang in chat is saying. The likelihood of something returning is proportional to how much the mechanic was tied to the campaign flavor and story-wise. And like the best ones of these are going to be ones that aren't actually like tied to it. The ones that are going to be most likely to come through.
That makes sense. Like, I think Poison has a lesser chance of coming back than something like Explore.
Yeah.
Because it's more specific.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, why don't we start at the beginning, which Dunwich is kind of a weird campaign in terms of its mechanics, because it's kind of like identityless, right? Like it's the first campaign. It didn't really have like a mechanical identity that we see later on. It was kind of, people even say today, it feels a little bit Monster of the Week. But it makes sense for the first campaign, right? Like they were just getting the traditional stuff out there. But we did agree that like the idea of story allies has kind of been started in Dunwich and has kind of been a through line in a good chunk of other campaigns. And I'm like literally pointing to almost all of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will say there are some things that had some similarities, like scenario 1A where you discard from the encounter deck to look for jazz, and then in the finale when you discard to look for locations.
Yeah.
I think something like that could come back as its own mechanic. Just the concept of milling the encounter deck to look for something.
Yeah, and we saw that again. By the way, there's going to be spoilers for everything on this one. This is a gloves off. Even like custom content stuff might show up. But we saw that in Dream Eaters in the finale of the Dreaming Side and Where the Gods Dwell, right?
True, with the Nyarla boss.
Yeah, looking for him in the encounter deck, which is really cool actually. So this is gonna be kind of jumping around. We're gonna kind of like not go too much in a super order, but like that is hitting cards. First appeared in Carcosa, and although when we were making this, there were some people saying that hitting cards showed up again, so it's not really an identity of Carcosa, but this is actually an example of, I think, what this video is about, right? It's taking a card and exploring it again in a different way, and we saw that in coming into Dream Eaters, where it was explored to the ultimate sense of literally being like the final boss battle. So this is what I mean in the sense of like exploration of a mechanic can lead to cool discoveries, right?
Yeah, and I explored a little in Cyclopean as well, whereas these are more like changing the way you play, or you're restricting you on what you can do. The hidden cards I had in Cyclopean were almost more like triggered bombs, where you have to meet a condition before it triggers anything.
Yeah, and Axolotl in Dark Matter also kept going with the hidden cards, which makes sense because I remember he said that it was Carcosa, so I revisited some themes from Carcosa, right? And they were very similar to this one, to the point where like it actually was linked to campaign progress as well, because it could add like tokens to the bank, and I remember that being a scary part of Dark Matter.
Oh yeah. I need to replay Dark Matter because I still don't think my group has replayed it since it was in alpha, and it was a very different beast in alpha.
Oh yeah, that's that was my first time playing. It was not alpha, but it was like the version before it was the version everybody else played.
I still remember most tests being difficulty 4 or higher.
Yep. Yeah.
And now people say it's on the easier side of things. So I'm like, wow, I really gotta replay this.
Yeah.
It'll be a completely different experience.
Yeah, that's because but it's cool. I honestly think that like That's a different topic. We're not gonna get too deep into that. Let's stay on topic. I'm really bad at staying on topic, but let's.
Well, me too. I don't think I'm gonna help you out much there.
We have doubt and conviction. Next was another thing in Carcosa, and I think this is a mechanic that kind of has returned, not directly as doubt and conviction, but I think this was kind of just like this is a mechanic that is actually just like unique to Arkham, where this is just the campaign log. Right, I think that this is less specifically doubt and conviction, but I think this is actually like campaign log mechanics.
I'd say so, because there's a lot of different ways to track things with that. I'm trying to think of another solid parallel. Probably TSK with alliance with either the Foundation or the Coterie.
Yep.
It kind of functions in the same way.
Yep.
Where depending which one you have more of, scenarios change.
Yeah.
And it's usually just through the monster and tablet token.
And this is one of the ones that what makes, I think, like specifically this Lost Soul unique is that it actually impacts, like your campaign log impacts your cards, right? And I think that is kind of neat that Carcosa does. Beyond setup and like all that kind of stuff. Because I mean, I don't know much about Scarlet Keys. I've played it, I think, 3 times now. Yeah, Yig's Fury is another one, which is Vengeance, as this one right here. Very similar kind of thing, where it impacts like the decisions you're making. I think that's ultimately why. I've said this before. Why Forgotten Age is really good is that so much of it is actually like dependent on the scenarios you're playing, not like the reading you're doing between scenarios, which I think is really cool.
And now that I think about it, Vengeance probably indirectly inspired Notice Encyclopean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because it's not like a one-to-one where it's on specific cards, but it just makes you careful about what you're doing.
Yeah. Or like, or punishing you for like, going too hard in certain ways. Notice is Encyclopean, right? That's what that one's from.
Yep.
The kind of, what I think is the two, because we talked about Poison and Vengeance being pretty linked to the campaign. The two that are open, I think we can agree, are Explore and Supply tokens. We haven't seen.
I don't think they'll revisit Poison just because it's kind of a fail more mechanic.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, linked like all Arkham, Poison is linked with Yig, and we're very unlikely to see Yig ever come back again.
Yeah.
I could see, like, Yogg and Haster maybe one day making some sort of appearance again, like, even just as a cameo, but I can't imagine we're ever going to see, like, any sort of Yig something or other again.
I do like it when other gods cameo, because
yes.
I think Dr. Jack put Yogg-Sothoth in the Call of the Plaguebearer just in an interlude, just to show that this is like a big cosmic thing, and you just happen to be at the center of it.
And he also has the battle royale between Haster and Cthugha being a plot point too, which is like a little more than a cameo, but it's cool to see stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Explore is very contentious. It's been in Forgotten Age, and it's also in the Abyss Guardian, or whatever that, Guardians of the Abyss. It appears in the second version of that one.
Yeah, well, I guess it shows they were made exactly the same time.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of an Explore? Do you think something like this has space to come back?
I think it does, but it has to be a specific flavor for one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they need to kind of tweak it a bit.
Yep.
Like, you know how I tweaked it when I did the DLC scenario for Forgotten Age? It kind of scaled it to make sure that if you're on one player, you're not just going to be wasting entire rounds trying to get through the Explore. And if you're on 4-player, you don't just get through the whole thing in 2 rounds. Yeah,
yeah. It is. I like the scaling ability. I think as well that I think that the Explore mechanic, I think even they were like, it's a bit. We wish we had like some more time with it, because we saw the Return to version, which I don't think personally is necessarily better or worse. I think it's just different, right? I think they both have their pros and cons.
I think a lot of people online prefer the Return to just because it doesn't feel like you're up against a brick wall from the start.
It is true, but I actually do think I've at this point now I think that the basic one is actually easier to game than the Return to one. So like there's like it's one of those ones where like it feels worse, but I actually think it's easier to solve, which is like that's like the thing for it. I agree that it is less oppressive at the beginning, especially on blind plays, But
it also depends, because like in the Return set, when you're adding cards to like Boundary Beyond, it just makes that scenario even more horrible.
Yes. I think to me what the problem with the Explorer thing is actually like I think some scenarios just shouldn't have had stuff in the deck, right? Because like yeah, like there was none in Depths of Yoth. They add one into the Return to, and I think it actually makes the scenario worse. But in Boundary Beyond, they take them out, and it's much better, right? I think like the Explorers should not have been treated with like a blanket. This is how it works. It should be like looked at individually, what the stress points of the scenario are to really like find the perfect balance.
That's something that I don't think they could have known pre-launch.
No, definitely not.
It was just, I think Arkham was still formative here. I don't think they really like solidified what Arkham was until, honestly, not until Dream Eaters.
Yeah.
Because that was when they started saying, okay, we've solidified what we want Arkham to be. Now we can experiment some more just to have fun.
Yeah. As well as that too, this is something that like with custom content creators, you guys are able to adapt, right? They don't get that privilege. They have to adapt like a year, 2 years later.
True. They don't know how the community is going to like it. And even, I don't know how their clothes testing goes, but they can only go so far with them.
Yep.
Because I'm sure they're, well, this happens all the time. This is why they have a taboo list, but they'll release cards, and then sometimes years later somebody will say, hey, what about this? And they'll go, oh, we never thought of that interaction.
Yeah, there's just no way for them to cover everything. It happens in all card games, and Arkham's community is still like quite small in comparison to other stuff. It happens in all of them. You take it from your design team of, you know, for Arkham, it's like 3 people and like the testers, and that's like, you know, that's probably like 20 or 30, maybe 50 people, and then turn it to 2,000 people at once. Things are going to break. And like, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. I do hope Explore does return because like, I think we saw that's what Axolotl did with Scan. It's kind of like a Explore, but for story, I think is a really cool idea.
And they kind of avoided doing it in Edge of the Earth, even though they could have had it in. So I think we won't see it unless we get another, like, wilderness or harsh environment campaign, like maybe some kind of Egypt desert campaign.
I think that's very true, because I think Explore also doesn't really fit unless it has that kind of theme, right?
Yeah, someplace with a whole lot of big unknowns.
Maybe,
not just someplace out in the cosmos.
Yeah, maybe like somewhere like Ithaqua could be it, like we're in like, you know, Pacific Northwest wilderness for like, they could bring it back for one scenario, right? And I mean, they kind of actually do. Because you played Twisted Hollow in Hemlock. That brings back Pursuit for just a one of, right?
Oh yeah, they did.
Yeah. So like, I think they could do that.
Honestly, something that I'd love to see is if for the occasional standalone scenarios they make, if they kind of tinker with past mechanics for that.
Yep. Yeah. The standalones are like perfect for that kind of thing.
Like if they went like, well, we're never going to have a campaign set in Australia, but here's a scenario set in Australia that uses Explore, something like that.
100%. Yeah. Supplies is another one. Supplies I think are tough, just because the only showing we have for them is from the Forgotten Age. But I think Supplies is a very deep sort of thing. It's kind of like Doubt and Conviction, where it's basically mostly just campaign log design, right? But
for the most part, yeah. And just how much risk reward you want to do, because like if you don't want to buy any medicine, then you're just going to bank on never being poisoned. Yeah.
But I think like the idea of having, because like to me, Arkham's root is sort of choose your own adventure in a lot of ways, right? Like there's a lot of that in kind of like the thesis of the design, at least in the campaign log, right? And I feel like there could be stuff like this that's less punishing, but more like what you choose determines like things that can happen, right? Like
that also reminds me in After Threads of Fate, that's the only scenario or the only place in any campaign I can think of where you can heal trauma. Do you think they'll ever revisit that?
I think they should. I think it's fine. I think it's fun. I think it's flavorful. I think that it needs to be like front-loaded trauma, like the way Forgotten Age is, for it to like actually really resonate, I think. But
I think they're committed to doing more of these kind of non-linear campaigns, and maybe it's something there where there's a cost to go heal that trauma, but you'll pay for it in other ways.
Yeah, you can heal. Yeah, you can heal trauma and sleepovers in Edge of the Earth, which is, I think, also pretty nice. I'm cool with healing trauma. I think that like
I guess that's true. I guess my group never did it because we managed to avoid a ton of deaths when we were doing our run of it.
Yeah, I mean, it is Edge of the Earth is, I think, a relatively easy campaign. And like there's usually better things to do than heal trauma too, even if you have it, like more experience or, removing frost tokens and all that. But I think that like if this is not in the sense that it returns specifically 1-to-1, like supplies are in Forgotten Age, but like I think that there is something here that could be mined.
That's if like, there was like another campaign in a wilderness setting, like at the start of the campaign, you have like a limited amount of things you can pick.
Yep.
Well, that's exactly what supplies are, but like almost like this is it for the whole campaign rather than this is it for this leg of the journey.
Yep. I think it would be.
I'd have to think on it for a while.
I think it would also be good too, because I think the problem with supplies, I guess, get why it happens. It's like it was supposed to be positive and negative. I think it should all just be positive, and they should be micro positives, right? But like, say for example, it was like, let's just look at like dark matter structured example. There's 2 scenarios, and then you choose the order of the next 3. If it was like you get to choose, you play 2 scenarios, and then you like go into the wilderness, and you get to choose like 1 supply to bring, and it makes like one of the scenarios like have a little change to it, right?
Like
something like that.
With the way supplies are in TFA, there's a bit of FOMO.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
right.
Nobody got chalk. Well, I guess we're just screwed here.
Yeah, and I think this is actually something that when we get to the open world is kind of the FOMO is a risk that I think should be avoided in terms of like design decisions.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance because even stuff that I think avoids FOMO, I've had feedback before where people say it's a negative mechanic. Like you mentioned earlier the companions in Oz.
Yeah,
I tried to sort of force a little variety in them by adding that fatigue mechanic.
Yeah,
and I had a playtester tell me, well, that's a negative mechanic because I want to use the same ones all the time. Which it's a fair feedback thing to say because he didn't like it.
Yeah. But at the same time, like I think that's less FOMO and that's more like what's I'm trying to say? It's more like no, that is actually I'm gonna bound to that the FOMO thing. FOMO, this is from Holy Helicopter. FOMO is a good thing for replayability, but it's very hard to balance. And I agree with that completely. But like to me that critique, while fair, I think it's like, to me, that's not so much FOMO as more of like, maybe it is FOMO because you're not like really missing out, but it's just like you don't want like to be disrupted, And I guess like disruption is a thing that you need to balance as well as a game designer. And I think that actually goes really well into Haunted because like Haunted, I think, had a good base, right? But I think that it unfortunately failed in its design goal, right?
I think Haunted had the same problem that Concealed eventually had, where the people who are really good at it have no problems with it, and the people who are already struggling just don't do well.
Yep. So Haunted is Retaliate for Investigates, which on paper is perfect, right? Like it's like, why wouldn't that exist? And the answer is because the class that does it the most never really gets affected by it.
And it's usually just the flexes that just get punished for trying to help out during downtime.
My favorite use of Haunted is actually like Realm of Torment, you know, where it's like just an effect. It's like a passive like effect on a location that triggers based on something else, not so much the investigate side of it, right?
Yeah. As a changing effect for an encounter card, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But I think they also overdid it for the encounter deck because there's also like Shapes in the Mist and other things that just constantly make you suffer the haunted effect just for existing with no like test to prevent it or something.
I mean, I'm okay with that stuff.
Torment is forcing it once and then you get to try to test to get rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with like the Shapes in the Myth because I do think that like the Mythos deck should be mean. I think even like custom content at this point, the Mythos decks are getting too nice. I think they're like players have started to win over like the difficulty. And like I think that Shapes in the Myth, like it's okay to have effects like that because most haunted things aren't too bad, right? Like I understand like the surging into something can be really bad. Actually, I think that's something that if we go into deeper design, Surge and counter cards probably need to be tweaked a little bit because I get the idea is that you want your players to be affected by an encounter card, right? You don't want them to just have a whiff. But at the same time, I think you could like design better than just Surge, right? Like if Shapes in the Myth was like resolve a haunted location, if no haunted location triggers, do this bad thing instead, right? I think that would like make it a lot easier to manage because it's like it feels less, I think, just like swingy in a way that doesn't feel fun.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people kind of get fatigued going through TCU because it seems like every part of the game is a potential death spiral. And if you get lucky, then you can get through it without much pain. But if you just get bombarded at the start, there's really nothing to help you regain tempo.
Yeah. So for me with Haunted, I think that it should lose the retaliate on investigate, but I love the idea that I like this text that can change based on other cards, and I think this is something that actually AUG is doing in their Night of Vespers campaign. Having like keywords that depend on other things, which I think is really cool.
Me and one of my friends are gearing up to play that, so I can give you more information on that soon.
Sick, yeah. It's something that I actually incorporate in a lot of my games where it's just like a keyword. It's like trigger X, and then like depending on what you're doing, X changes depending on like what bad guy you chose, right? It's a very fun mechanic, I think, to just like open up design space too in terms of like text. And I think that this is something I would love to see them revisit.
I'd also like to see something that's almost like a reverse haunted, like if you do too well at investigating when something happens.
Yes, that's something that I know you incorporate on a lot of your treachery designs as well and your locations, and I agree. Doing too good, like while yes, it punishes rogues as well as seekers, I think rogues and seekers are the two strongest classes in the game and should probably be punished a bit.
Yeah, and I think if you're testing like 8 up on something, you should have something to worry about.
Yep, agreed. Yeah. From Holy Helicopter, you hear that Hemlock was a bit of return to form in the nature of the Mythos decks? Yes, I do think that it surprised me in Hemlock how many cards just like sometimes just didn't surge when they're affected and happen, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Or it like whiffed, and I'm like, all right, cool. Like, you know, and then sometimes they hit really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I've seen so far, that's very true. It's brutal in the right circumstances, but if it's not brutal, it's not going to try to force it to be brutal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's actually a very, I think, good like motto for it to have. You don't need to, and this actually, you don't need to force every encounter card to be brutal, right? If it's like, if it whiffs or it hits softer than normal, that's just like a player will sometimes have a good turn and a player will sometimes have a bad turn. The Mythos deck is considered to be a player in the game, and you should remember that. It should be the same.
Like the card that like has the highest rate of hits to whiffs is probably obscuring fog, and they
Yep.
still use that today.
Another one is locked door, right?
True.
Like, yeah.
Because if it happens to go on a location that nobody cares about, and you're like, all right,
Yeah.
it can just exist there for the rest of the game.
Yeah. Or it happens to hit the location that you were trying to investigate next turn, and your goon is caught up with an enemy. It's like it is. It's just like that is good, and that's why they're core cards, right? While they're still played today.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Swarming. This is something. It's returned, right? Or has it only been returned in?
I think it was in War of the Outer Gods for the bug faction.
Yes, because it's used so much in custom campaigns, which makes sense. It's a flavorful and like well-made mechanic.
It is. I know I used it for Jumanji for a couple kinds of enemies. There was like a swarm of bats and a swarm of mosquitoes.
And yeah, because it tells such a story, right? Like bats and mosquitoes. It's perfect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Zooks, for some reason, which are far more vicious than I ever thought they'd be. But
yeah, I actually never really looked at the teeth in the picture. This thing's scary as hell.
I mean, it is chowing down on a hand there. So.
Yeah. There is some rules baggage that comes with swarming, but I'll be honest. I think the best mechanics should have some rules issues that might show up, because you're never going to make everything perfect.
Do you think with the big box formats, if they had designed swarming, they would have included like swarming dummy cards to include so you don't have to use your own deck? Or would they have gone with that?
That's a great question. I think it's better if they didn't. Mostly because I think that it becomes... The game opens up more if you're able to also use a player's deck as a resource for the game occasionally, you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Because they also used player cards for the Beyond the Black Throne.
Yeah,
or
Beyond
before
the
the Black
yeah.
Throne.
They use them in Carcosa if you have that one, at Unspeakable Oath, you can turn them into into like determination, and they soak for 2 sanity.
True.
Yeah. Courage, yeah, the courage asset, yeah. They use them for Vengeance 1 in the Forgotten Age finale. Yep.
That is true.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like, they shouldn't do it often. Like, it shouldn't happen all the time, but I think it is better that that didn't happen, just because it is a resource that I think, because you actually, like, you don't lose anything with swarming. You lose them in, like, the Forgotten Age with that Vengeance thing, and I can understand people, like, you know, not enjoying that as a mechanic, right? But at the same time, it's okay, it's 1 card. But like with these, you don't actually lose them. If you put them from the top and the bottom, but they were basically on the bottom of your deck no matter what. Like, unless you are like stacking your deck, but if you're doing that in Dream Eaters, you'll learn pretty quickly to just be aware of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just part of the campaign, like knowing that you're going to lose a lot of cards in Dunwich.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right. It's just like one of those things. But I do like an example with like the concealed cards. I like that, those having their own. But I think swarming, that is an interesting question though. You had me thinking for a second.
It is probably for the best, like you said, that it worked out this way, but it's just something to think about.
Yep.
So I think we'll see swarming in the future, depending on flavor more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really, I don't know. Is there anything in Hemlock Vale that uses swarming? You don't have to give specifics, but...
So for that's why for some reason I thought there was, because I was like... I feel like it just happened, but like I said, it might just be because I played Ages Unwound, and that just had... No, I didn't have swarming, but it had like a swarming light, so I think I might just experience... Chat, is there any swarming in Hemlock? I don't think there is.
Because I haven't played it, but I know there's a bug scenario.
That bug scenario is pretty fun, but I don't think it's in that one. I don't think there's any swarming. Hemlock has probably one of my favorite... new mechanics, but unfortunately I think it does the same thing that a lot of mechanics do, where it punishes ranged weapons more than melee weapons, which we'll get to in Concealed, which I think is an issue that we'll touch on as one of the kind of things that pop up with Concealed.
Right.
All right. And then hidden cards also return in Dream Eaters, which we've kind of already touched on.
And just because it's on the card here, another hypothetical, do you think peril should be on more cards?
Yes, I do. I think the game is more exciting when you can't strategize and you have to make your own decisions.
I think that's fair.
It's one of those things that also, like, because I was playing with Eric, and Eric was very scared of peril cards. Because suddenly they had to just be like, I have to make this decision on my own. And I would just, like, put my fingers in my hands and watch them, right? But it was that Eric learned to look at their hand, look at the board state, and make a decision. I think perils teach the game very well compared to, like, other things.
And I think we had one of those moments when playing Circus with the Ancient Evils replacement.
Yes, and that was a really cool moment, right? Because I made my decision, and then you made yours, and they were both the right decision, and we were both happy with each other's decisions at the time. It was really nice.
Yep, I'm very happy with that card.
I'm curious, like, what... because peril just means you can't commit cards, right? And you can't, like, influence the decision.
You can't talk about it, and you can't commit to other players' peril cards.
Do you think would peril work on an enemy?
That would be an interesting thing to explore. Because I'd have to look at the rules. I just want to make sure it's not tied to the revelation effect rather than the whole card.
There's a peril enemy, but it has resolution. Oh, is it the cult? Yeah, because I mean, like, peril with spawn would also work, right? Potentially, if it's not tied to the revelation.
I think that makes sense.
Because that would, like, that stuff seems cool. I would also love, like, the problem. So actually, this is something that I think I wish. This goes to what I'm going to be talking about on in Innsmouth right away. But I wish that the designers in the base game. This is so much like hindsight is 2020. The foresight would have been impossible, right? But I wish they had one extra token that they used instead of resource to denote things.
Yeah, just almost like a scenario token, just a generic one.
Yeah, I think that would have been, like, so huge. Because, like I'm just even thinking, like, a revelation that's an enemy, which would, like, put when this enemy enters play, put a horror token or a resource token on it. If it has a horror token, it deals +1 horror. If it has, like, a resource token, it deals +1 damage, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably why I end up using horror on cards so much when I do my encounter designs.
Yep, because it is basically just like a generic token that's not used for other things, right?
Right, because you don't put horror on enemies or treacheries for anything.
Yep.
At least so far.
Yeah, but that's, like, huge hindsight's 2020. Like, that I wish that it was, but they had no way of knowing, right?
I mean, if we could go back 7-8 years to the original Arkham team, we'd probably just send the message, give us the keys now.
Yes, there we go. Let's go to keys, because that is it. I think keys should have been in here since day one. It is such an open mechanic, and it would open up, like, incredible design space in a variety of different ways, I think.
Honestly, even as it is here, it's a little wordy. They could have more easily just had, like, a keyword.
Yep.
And just say, like, key random or key black.
Blue, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I also think, like, if keys from the get-go, I don't think you need them all the time, but I think they are, like, it's like you go back to Doom, right? It makes me think of Doom. One of the first, like, video games that, like, just tore shit up, and just having, like, you need the red key to open this door, you need the blue key to open this door, right? I think there's a lot of cool things that can really be done with it.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, keys are... I almost do and don't want to work with keys more because they're locked to the Innsmouth box.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tricky. That's why I end up usually just coming up with workarounds instead.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's... I wouldn't want to see them too much now, right? Because I think because they're locked to Innsmouth, like, I think they feel very Innsmouth, and I think that they should be revisited again, but, like, not all the time. But I do wish they were there in day one.
I'd say there's a good chance of any of the Innsmouth stuff coming back for the Drowned City.
Yeah, so going on to Flood, The flood, they got to be coming back, right?
I mean, it's the drowned city. I mean,
they have
if
to.
things weren't being flooded, it'd be odd.
Yeah, like it just kind of has to, right? I really like flood as a mechanic, because it's like it's not binary, right? Because there's 3 modes on it, but it's binary for being flooded. But I think that there's some things you could do with it. I really do. I don't think it has like the legs in the sense that like I think like swarming has, where it's kind of like it can turn kind of an every other sort of thing. But I think that there is some design space in flooding that could be really cool to explore.
Yeah, even I don't know if you do this with like almost like a field of geysers or something, where locations suddenly become flooded and then drain away.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. Yeah. Yeah, like it's...
Yeah, there's a lot to work with flooded, because it's due to a whole bunch of mechanics. It just makes any location steadily scarier, or the potential to be unflooded and make it passable. And
yeah, because it really is what it is, like basically just like modes. That's all it is. There's this saying in Magic where every mechanic is kicker. So with with Magic and kicker is like you pay for a card and you can pay like an extra 2 to have the card do another effect, right? And like when you really strip down a mechanic to its basic levels, you can kind of just see what it is. And this flooded is just basically a different mode for a location, right? So like flooded could return as a different token that's like hot or cold, right?
Yeah, easily could.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that Geyser's idea. Oh, and it also made me think of like the water temple from Ocarina of Time.
Oh, yeah.
Changing like the levels of the water so you can do different things.
Yeah. You know, I wouldn't surprise me if they wanted to do something like that in Innsmouth, but had to rein it back in just due to dev time. I'm gonna
shoot a shot. I think it's gonna happen in Drowned City because they referenced Hemlock being like Majora's Mask to Scarlet Key's Ocarina of Time. So I think Duke's a big Legend of Zelda fan, and we're gonna see a Drowned Temple in Drowned City.
The whole team is, because I know like even back in Carcosa, if you fail on Black Star's Rise, when it says you've met with a terrible fate, you?
I think I'm gonna shoot my shot. I think there's gonna be something inspired by it in Drowned City, just changing the water levels to do different things. Because we kind of saw a light version of that in A Light in the Fog, like it was the objective at the end, right?
Right, pump room.
And I mean, it tells a story too. I think like mechanics that tell a story is really cool, and very deep
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah. Sweet. Okay, Edge of the Earth. Frost tokens. So, I'm gonna start all this right now. Is I respect that it's difficult if they add new tokens in order for players who have, like bought specialty tokens to keep that consistent. I'm gonna respect that for a second, but unfortunately, I personally throw that out the window because I feel like design shouldn't be determined by what a person purchased to make their game better in terms of like as the whole. So I respect it, but I'm not going to acknowledge it further beyond that.
So without Ithaqua, I don't think we'd see Frost tokens again.
Yeah.
However, I could see them using the exact same rules for like a heat token for Cthulhu or something.
Yes. I always joke that the sand tokens are going to come out eventually. In some, I had nothing for it, but basically that there's going to be more tokens at one point that work really well for it.
Yeah. It would not. I'd be curious to know if back through Arkham's dev history, if they wanted unique chaos tokens for different campaigns, but chose not to.
This, am I allowed to talk about the pirate stuff?
Yeah.
All right. Because this is something that you were kind of, if I remember, you were kind of employing where, like, different boxes have, like, pre-built different dice or something, right?
Yeah, it's an idea I'm still kicking around, but...
But it's kind of like that thing, right? Where, like, there's, like, an identity, and, like, I agree, like, maybe in each campaign there was, like, a token to kind of, like, live with the identity of the campaign, right?
Yeah, if anything, it'd have to be, like, just a variation of a D6 or something.
Yeah.
Where a different face could have, like, just one different face was different, so you could still know if you rolled a regular D6 and wouldn't put you out much.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't talked about it much, Holy Helicopter, but I am making an original game. It's kind of been on semi-hiatus because I've had other design work that's been eating up my time. But I am going to be making an original pirate-themed, story-based game, kind of like Arkham.
Yeah. I'm very excited for it, but I also respect that it's suddenly, like, as I've had so many games I've been cooking up myself, once you start doing your own thing, it just, like, it's so much more daunting than doing custom stuff, especially because, you know, you really only have, like, one shot at it for your own custom things, too.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's intimidating in a different way.
Yeah, exactly, right? But yeah, I think Frost tokens, the only way they'd come back is Athaqua. But I think we'll see more special type tokens in the future.
Yeah.
I also
and like for Circus, I'm just having another extra token with a simple effect, because they just need to make sure it's not going to bog the game down.
Exactly. And I think like moon tokens are an example of what could be explored with it, right? Does Athaqua deserve a full campaign? I think so. I honestly think that with the new format, I think any ancient one can work for a full campaign. Because at this point...
Yeah, I was hoping for Athaqua when they first showed off Edge of the Earth, but...
Yeah.
Well.
I mean, I think realistically, the people who are buying Arkham now are doing so because of, like, the history of the game and not, like... I think we might see a bump in sales because of Cthulhu, but I think at this point now... it's kind of just like a legacy game at this point. There's a lot of stuff in there. And yeah, as a Pacific someone who's near the Pacific Northwest, I want Athaqua more than freaking anything. Going back to my first point, I said I wasn't going to talk about it further, but I imagine if we do see specialty tokens, they're going to keep it at 8 maximum, just because some foresight to be like, hey, people like who bought Frost tokens can now use those Frost tokens for these tokens in place of them.
True. That's a very big design consideration. I actually had that in mind for moon tokens.
Yeah.
Because at any time in the campaign, you will never be using more than 6.
Nice,
so
yeah,
if you
exactly.
want to use Frost tokens for it, you can.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to do, because I'm really enjoying Circus so far, and I was like, I want to print this one when it's finalized, and I want to play with Travis and Brandon. We'll use Frost tokens for moon tokens.
It's very cold moon out tonight.
It is, yeah. Tekalilis. So I think Tekalilis won't return in this exact shape because of the flavor, right? So Tekalili itself won't exist again. I think we can agree on that. But what do you think about this idea of adding weaknesses to your deck that carry over until drawn?
I think it's also a good idea, because part of the power creep of the game has come to how quickly players can get through their decks.
Yep.
And if there's more risks to getting through your deck quickly, then that kind of puts a better cap on the difficulty of the campaign.
Yep. Yep. I'm with you on that. I like Tekalilis as like a concept. I think the Tekalilis unfortunately hurt the fighters. I wish they hurt the seekers or like the clue getters a bit more, but I think that's kind of like Arkham as a whole to me, right?
Yeah, that was unfortunate. That was basically like every enemy had a Tekalili thing from fighting or engaging it, and then I can't think of a single location that forced you to put Tekalilis in for discovering clues from it.
Yeah, yeah. I understand that, like, it progresses the game, right? So, like, you don't want to punish progress too much, but at a certain point, I think you kind of need to. But I also would love, like, I love the idea of weaknesses being shelved in the deck, even if they did nothing, right? If it just said, like, Revelation, set this card aside. Like, it just, like, eats draws, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a cool way to have a mechanic punish the players. I think it's really nice.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the same concept as a hidden card in a way, where it's attacking your deck as a representation of madness.
Yes, yeah, very, very true. All right, partners. I'll let you start this one. What do you think of partners?
I think it was partially successful, because it added more personal connection to the story, and it did scale well per player because you only ever get one partner at a time. However, I'm not sure that the payoff was good enough. Because any of them could die at any given moment in the campaign, you didn't investing in any single one of them never felt worth it.
Yeah. This is actually, so Travis actually talked about this recently, and Travis kind of agrees that like the effects are cool. Like it's fun to have like an extra effect at the start of the scenario, but like in terms of like the campaign as a whole, actually, you know what, we will talk about that holy helicopter. If I move on, remind me. On the campaign as a whole, I think that like the idea of partners did fail because like they kind of just felt a little bit too rigid. And exactly, like, you don't really feel compelled to save them, especially because whenever one of them dies, you remove all the resolute ones, right?
Yeah.
When it should instead be like that person saves the day and doesn't die, right?
Yeah, just as a prevention from more FOMO or bad experience, negative player experience. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
But from what I remember of my group's run, there wasn't really any incentive to take the whole crew. It was basically like, well, we're taking Claypool, and if Claypool dies, then we'll think about another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Or in our case with Bryn, he never takes the dog guy, but he always makes sure the dog guy is our priority, right? It's just like, right. It's kind of just one of those things that like, it just, it kind of just like happens like that. For me, I'm kind of like, especially after Hemlock, I don't want to see any more ally assets unless they're things like the boat driver in Cyclopean or the guy who's hanging out in the lounge in For the Greater Good, who's just like there to paint a picture for the scene as opposed to being something that is there for the plot, you know?
Right. And that's also kind of why I did the companions in Oz the way I did. Because they weren't taking up ally slots, but I still wanted a whole lot of them. But I had to get a cap on the power that I would provide.
Yep.
And I also didn't want you to just pick one crew and take them through all the scenarios. So
yeah, honestly, actually, so with Oz, the fatigue system I love so much because I actually care so much about the Oz companions and I care so little about the Edge of the Earth partners. And I actually didn't read any of the optional stuff because I was just like, cool, they're, you know, like they're tired or like they're going to introduce themselves. But you chose such good characters because obviously they're based on like the stuff from the books, right? But you chose perfect characters that like even just like looking at them, I was like, I'm instantly connected with this guy. And I feel like there's not as much for these ones, even on like terms of the selection for them, because like apart from Dog Guy or Avery Claypool, because he does like, you know, like a good effect, you don't really like connect with them, right? And I think that's a huge challenge with this kind of stuff. You need to be able to instantly connect with them, even without reading the text or getting to attach to them by that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think another problem, this was just mainly the story, is that the only development any of them get is between each other, and you're just kind of there.
They're just kind of there, yeah.
It's kind of the Kingdom Hearts problem where the story happens and you're just standing in the background watching it happen.
Yep. That's a great question. How would you compare them to Dunwich? I think I have a lot more of an attachment to Warren Rice, Francis Morgan, Armitage, Earl Sawyer, and Zebulon Watley, just because I'm not experiencing their story. We're experiencing the story together, right? And there's a big change for that.
Yeah, that's probably the sticking point. It's making them relevant to the players, not making the players relevant to them.
Yep, 100%. And I think that Hemlock Vale did better for that. I feel like we were all sharing one story for those, but I'm still just like, too many other people in the story. I just want it to be me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen of Hemlock so far, I've been really impressed because the problem with the characters in Edge of the Earth and with Scarlet Keys is the story telling you these are really cool, amazing people. Watch them do cool, amazing things.
Yeah.
Whereas Hemlock Vale goes, these are a bunch of people on the island. If you're interested in any of them, you can pursue them.
Yeah. And I think also, even though the personification is pretty kind of like surface value, there's something that happens in Hemlock. This is not really a spoiler, but like Theo Peters, you probably have interacted with him like once or twice, and he's always talking about like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right? And that's such a small thing that is instantly like every time you see him, he's talking about like Jules Verne or some shit, and you're like, okay, this is the Jules Verne guy, right? And it's stuff like that even that just really works for like giving the character a personality that like makes you care about them without doing what you're saying, just saying, hey, this character's really cool, you should like them, right?
Yeah, I think the one that stuck out to me the most was Simeon, the little troublemaker.
Yeah.
Because you look at his card and he just looks like an annoying little kid. But then the first interaction with him, he's like, "Oh, sorry, I thought I was pranking somebody else. Well, I'll leave you alone."
Yeah. Yeah.
So like he's not just a cartoon character. He's got a little depth to him.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. There's one more that I didn't got here that we'll touch on. Checkpoints. Basically, I guess like checkpoints is also like repeating a map with a different scenario.
I think it has the potential to do really good things in campaigns, but I think the problem with Edge of the Earth was that, like, you do all 3 Ice and Death parts back to back to back.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts to feel stale sooner than it should, even if, like, the second one is the coolest one.
And Holy Helicopter, they did visit they revisited checkpoints in Fortune and Folly too. Good point.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be nicer almost if it was more like again Dr. Jack's Call the Plague Bearer, where you keep going back to the same map, but you have a scenario in between to sort of process what's happening in between visits to that map.
Yeah. I think what also would make it better, it had a little bit of an unfortunate thing that I think was just some collateral damage where it came right after Innsmouth and everyone asked, do we spend experience? And I think that's not a checkpoint problem. That was a right after Innsmouth problem.
Yes.
And also it suffers. I think that it would be better if you played it, even if you played Ice and Death 3 times, if Ice and Death had some sort of variance for its locations.
That is true, because after one playthrough, you know exactly which one has the highest shelter value, and you never have to think about any other location after that. And
that's kind of Travis's big issue with Edge of the Earth, is that the replayability is actually pretty low because the maps are so static. Yes, like City of the Elder Things has like the different setups in different locations, and I think that one is quite replayable, but like just even adding extra shelter locations would be huge.
Yeah, just... I don't know. It's hard to say because if it's all randomized, then there's a chance that any given playthrough could have less victory than others, and that's always annoyed me about
Oh, no,
others.
I mean, like, not even like, but, like, maybe, like, some were always, like, 7 or up, but, like, the text on the locations, too, was also, like, different, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, all the locations having the exact same text and you play it 3 times, like, that's pretty bad for replayability.
Yeah, they'd have to do like multiple copies of each, and during each part of the scenario you swap out each one with a version that hasn't been used yet.
Yeah. Because like I respect the shelter, like, or even like I respect the shelter as a mechanic. I think it works really well. It tells a really good blind play story. Or if it was like after you'd found shelter, there were like non-shelter versions you could play with, right? To like make those locations like even be a bit more mechanically connected to that scenario. Okay, on to Scarlet Keys, which I know everyone's gonna probably want us to shit talk stuff, but I actually like a good chunk of the mechanics. They have their issues, but I like the concept for them. So why don't we start with decoys? Because I think that one's gonna be a little bit, and like the concealed cards. Because I like them, but I also have my issues with them. And I imagine our issues are actually pretty similar. So why don't you start for concealed cards?
I like it in concept, but the way it panned out was that it rewarded people who specialized in one stat.
Mm-hmm.
That's really just the shame of it. And I think part of that is on the encounter card design as much as it is the mechanic. Because this is a little bit of a spoiler, I am doing a Halloween scenario this year, and I will be exploring concealed in it. But rather than do what Scarlet Keys did and have generally higher shroud values to sort of trying to rein that in, I'm going to have encounter cards that play around with how you're exposing mini cards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to not spoil as much as possible, but there's like a trio of enemies that will go to the shadows, and it's like if you expose this via investigating, then something happens. If you or via fighting or via evading. So the scenario or the locations themselves aren't going to be any more difficult to investigate than most other campaigns, but it makes you think about if you want to have the best available person to do it, or if you should have somebody who can do a bit of each, just because there's the chance that you'll be punished for doing one or the other.
Yeah. And I'm kind of with you. Sorry, I'm just trying to find there we go, an example of one of those. I also think it rewards specialization too much, and I think they unfortunately made that a bit too much of a forced effect by also having the shroud values be so high, right?
Because I think Scarlet Keys gave me like the most 5 and 6 shroud locations I've ever seen in a campaign.
Yep, it was insane. And I remember I thought that I hypothesized that we were going to see more as a response to old Keyring and stuff like that, because it came in the same cycle, right? But because it also was in Fortune and Folly, the shrouds were really high. But Fortune and Folly was also part of the it was like designed in tandem, right? And they removed it from the box.
Right.
So it was kind of like a nature of the concealed problem, not so much that, because Hemlock has normal human shroud values again for the most part, right?
Yeah.
But like it's one of those things where like it rewarded specialization, and they further did that. Like I like that you can use 3 different stats. It sucks to be a mystic sometimes. You need like a recurrable way to reveal them, right? Especially because the shrouds are so high. If the shrouds were lower, it would be a lot cooler and a lot more viable for like anyone to be able to do it. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But to me, my biggest issue with the concealed mechanic is they never explored it. It wasn't like really explored. There was the extra location stuff, but that was more fiddly than it was cool. There was like the passcode that you needed to do, which was cool, but like there was no other like variation for how concealed worked or like what it did. You look at like scan as a mechanic that was explored like 3 different ways in 3 scenarios, and there's none of that for concealed cards.
Yeah, for the most part, they used it just as action. Oh, there goes the phone. They mainly used it just for like soaking up and taking up your actions during a turn, rather than so like rather than have a 3 health enemy, you have a 1 health enemy who's in the shadows, and you have to spend an extra action getting it out, and then you kill it.
Yeah. When did Scarlet Keys come out? Was that 2022? Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that Scarlet Keys was like a perfect storm of ambition and COVID. It has to be, right?
It may also have been just sort of, I know that was MJ's last campaign, and
Yep.
she may have just wanted to really go out with a bang,
Yeah.
but they didn't have the development time to
Yeah.
make that bang big enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, 'cause, yeah, it was like very ambitious, and I love the ambition. I always have, and I always will.
I still really like the concept of the campaign, but it just needed more time in the oven, and it's time they could never have gotten, I'm afraid.
And yeah, and like I'm saying, if it did come out in 2020, I imagine a lot of the development time was in COVID, so I imagine they couldn't do as much as they would usually do, right? And maybe that's why things weren't explored as much, because you kind of just had to like get stuff out. This is all hypothesizing, right? But
Yeah.
yeah,
We can only guess. But I think the mechanic itself has meat on the bone,
yes,
but they're not making a good stew out of it.
no, it's definitely it needs some more time in the oven for sure, or on the stovetop, depending on what you're cooking. All right. Let's jump to these smaller mechanics before we talk about the big one, which let's talk about the keys first, because I actually, forgetting about the keys was pretty, I put hollows here too. I don't think it's a big enough, but I did put it here. We can touch on it briefly. Keys, I don't think we're ever going to see again, right? At least in this exact direct thing.
It's the doubt conviction thing that Carcosa has. It's just the campaign identity.
Yeah. The frames are gorgeous. I've never really looked at the frames before.
Yeah, the graphic design team for Arkham is always putting out bangers.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I don't like keys. I like these keys from Innsmouth. Don't like these keys. They just don't feel like that rewarding to me. And then you get one and it gets stolen from you like pretty soon after. Yeah.
That was really annoying because it was complete RNG whether or not you got it back, and there was nothing you could do to influence that.
Yep.
And I guess they did compensate you with a little XP, but it was still taking you really far out of your way to try and get it back.
Yeah. Like, I like the concept. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about Haunted, where like enemies can have certain passive effects that can just like suddenly they didn't have before, right? Like when they may be able to shift the evil side, right? And I think that's a cool kind of idea. I like that kind of random stuff that can happen, but I don't think it's even close to being like tight enough for this.
Yeah, when there's so much of the encounter deck too that's like focused on making your key go to its bad side, you're also hesitant to use it.
Yeah.
So it's almost just like an emergency button more than whatever's written on the card. Like, I'm keeping this on its stable side just so I can have something to shift if I need to.
Yeah, because as Heli Helicopter's saying, they're usually like taxed by other things, so you never get to use them for like the text on the card. Right? It might as well just say like side that is not bad and then side that is bad that you always just remove from and then never use the other side just until it is bad again.
Or they just give you clue tokens that you flip to their doom side. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's unfortunately it wasn't like, again, what we were talking about here. It's just like it didn't go as deep as it could have, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, I'm gonna. This is gonna sound like this. Some people think this might sound like mean, but I think unfortunately, too much time went into the campaign guide than it did into the scenarios for Scarlet Keys, which we'll get to when we get to the map. Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about the story because everyone already talks about that enough.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when we talk about like the campaign guide, I'm literally not talking about like the story even here either. I'm talking about like on the doubt and conviction side where it's mechanically there's just so much going on, and like putting it all together and like planning all of these visits, planning the sequence and trips that you can go takes up so much design times in turn of like all that kind of thing. So yeah, story be damned, we're not talking about that for this one. We're here talking about specifically the mechanical side of having to balance all these different locations.
And they did need to work on making each stop feel equally good to the players, even if it wasn't a scenario, even if it wasn't like the best result. there were a lot of times I was just hesitant to stop at anywhere that I knew there wasn't a scenario.
Yeah, this is actually something well, we're on the map. We might as well. We have the perfect transition to it. We might as well. The open world, I think, is a cool concept. I would have liked it more if so. I don't think we're ever gonna. We might see another open world, but I don't think we're going to, just because of the response as a whole, and also like the design time to go with it. I'd rather. I mean, I want another linear campaign, or at least like mostly linear. But I do think that Hemlock Vale does a pretty good job of open worlding a campaign.
Yeah, because it focused things, even if it was still open world.
Yeah, and you still always have the same scenario 2, 4, and 6 if you want, which is really nice. All the nights you can do the same one, or you can do something else for some of them. I think a problem with this too is that, I said this in my video, they should have had each connection to to London be a scenario, just so your first stop was something good. Because I think we went to Rome, and then it was nothing, and we were like, oh, it just sucks the winds out of your sails immediately.
I think my group did that too on our blind run. We went to Rome, and it was like, well, something's happening, but you have no idea what it is, so time to move on.
Yep. And like, they could have also done it by had like a different symbol, even though like it takes out some of the mystery. I do think they should have had like, it's like, so like an open world video game, right? It tells you where to go. Like a good example is Elden Ring, right? You get out of the tomb and you instantly see the glowing tree. There is the bonfire just to your left. The guy tells you follow the trail of light, which is currently arcing over into the tree line, which you can see, right? Or you can ignore that and just turn around. And yes, there were dossiers that told you where the scenarios were. I'm not gonna like say that either. That's like that they weren't there. But the problem is that your first step could just be nothing. And that shouldn't happen. Your first step should be something. It doesn't have to be a scenario, but it should have been like giving you a lead to follow. Or it should have been like, this is a bonus for this scenario, go there next, right? Like it should have been like something that was immediately a tangible reward, I think, to really pop off.
Yeah, more, or not more, but better breadcrumbs.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
I remember when my group did our blind run, we went to Kathmandu, and we got the whistle from Aleki, and then we had no idea what to do with it.
Yep.
And I still haven't played the secret scenario. That's the only scenario in this campaign I haven't played yet.
I haven't either. I want to earn it, but I haven't.
But I assume it has something to do with the whistle, and I still have no idea what to do with the whistle.
Yeah, you and me both. You and me both. And I'm trying all I can to not look it up. And even though it's probably super obvious, and I know there's people here, like Astute Dunspars, who got it on their first blind run, I think you're lying to me. I think you're all lying, and it's so convoluted and you can't get it unless you do a very specific set of things.
Yeah, because, again, no spoilers, but from the spoiler-free tips I've heard, it's like you have to take such a specific route that avoids scenarios that you're drawn to already that I'm not sure blind run of it is very likely.
Yeah. But I think, like, I like the open world concept. I think they should have included 3 or 4 paths to follow. Just like give it to you. Be like, hey, if you don't want to choose your own path, here are 3 that we recommended with like a different sort of vibe to them, you know?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So the open world as a mechanic, I think, is here to stay, but I think they learned lessons from this in Hemlock and are now going to plan accordingly.
Agreed. And I think also, I think that, like, yeah, there's going to be, like, this open world, I think, is going to be a lifeblood through this entire thing. But I do think a less is more approach is probably better, right?
I still think I prefer linear campaigns anyway, so that's why I keep
Agreed. I agree. Like, Hemlock's cool. I think the structure works really well. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. But it's hard. 8-part campaigns still just like tell a better cohesive story, I think, for the most part. Because, like, if you think about it, like, Hemlock works well because it is on an island, right? So it makes sense that you can check out different parts of the island. But, like, depending on, like, Drowned City, is it going to work in the same way? Like, are you just going to be able to choose to go to different parts of the city? This, or, like, what I really liked was fun. I don't think we're going to see it in an official thing, mostly because I think you nailed it in in Wonderland, where it's backwards or forwards, right?
Yeah, that was more just having fun experimenting.
Yeah, and I think it works really cool, and it fits with the flavor. I'd also love to see Dark Matter style, where it's like, or like House Always Wins Dunwich style. Small variations, but then like a linear finish, because I feel like it leads to a better finish, right? It leads to a better story climax.
My prediction for Drowned City, I think I'm going to call my shot now, is that it will be kind of like Hemlock, where you get to choose scenarios. Mm-hmm. But after every scenario you pick, a different part of the city gets flooded.
Okay.
And that will change scenarios and make them much harder, so you can either avoid those and keep doing the drier ones, or get something potentially extra out of the drowned ones.
I think that is... I think that's a pretty cool shot. And I think that's pretty sick. To bounce on this as well, I also think that while open stuff that's a little bit more open with selection is good, I do think that the designers will go back to kind of like more linear stuff too, because I think there is design space to explore there as well, as we see in custom campaigns, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I like that idea. I think that's a cool cult shot. I'm down for that. Yeah, Hemlock is definitely closer to Dunwich and Dark Matter style than Scarlet Keys. Scarlet Keys is incredibly open. You could play like the whole thing without getting I think when we did it, we only played 3 Scarlet Keys scenarios and the rest were all standalones. Like, it's entirely open. Hemlock Vale is on rails, but you get to like choose which path to take those rails down.
Yeah.
All right. Let's touch very briefly on hollows. Because this one's not, I mean, like, so I guess like the idea of this, not so much the hollow mechanic, because I think hollow is not going to return, but I think giving a designator to like cards that are removed and like using that as like a keyword like type thing, where like those cards are X and they have these effects.
Yeah, I could see that coming back. I did play around with it in Cyclopean too, with the Ancient Evils variant.
Yep.
But the way that they used hollows, I don't think a lot of people enjoyed, because you were losing cards from your deck, and then you were punished additionally for how many cards were removed from your deck.
Yeah. Yeah, remember this is something that you talked to me about, actually. We talked about, I think when we did our Cyclopean, when I did my interview with you about it, the cards getting removed, you had a lot of people not enjoy that, right?
Yeah, and I think if you're forced to remove cards from your deck, like if you make the choice for my Ancient Evils variant to remove the cards from your deck, then you have decided that is a sufficient enough penalty.
Yes, yeah.
So this removing cards from your hand, your deck, your play area even, and then swatting you with the ruler even more, then that just leads to people not enjoying the mechanic.
Yeah, I'm like talking about the mechanic preference. I'm an outsider, I think, looking in, because I view cards getting removed from my deck as like a non-factor. Like, it doesn't actually like do anything to me. It doesn't hurt my game plan at all. I understand why it does, but that's why I think that like this is a mechanic. And that's like when I remember, because we talked about it with your Ancient Evils that remove stuffs. I was like, yeah, I don't care, just take rid of them. It's not actually a problem. But I see why. It's like the Heed the Dream, that one survivor card, the dilemma, and everyone fixated on the cards they could lose as opposed to the cards they could draw. And that's why I think that I don't like this idea of we're coming back to hollows as a specific thing that removes cards. Because as you said, like, you're getting punished and then you get whacked with a ruler, right? Exactly that. You're just getting punished more. But I love the idea of like cards. Like, this kind of is a little bit like swarming, right? Using cards as something else. And I think if you get those cards back, that's pretty cool. I think that's like a fun thing to try to play with.
Yeah, it's fine for swarming because you're not losing the cards until you... you're losing the cards until you deal with the thing, which is fine. But like, I would have liked to see in Scarlet Keys instead, like, a really tough enemy, but it gets minus fight for every card you have hollowed to
Yeah.
a minimum of 1 or something.
Yeah,
So
I think
even
also if there
you
was
are
more
losing
like
cards, yeah.
because there was some counterplay with like enemies that when you could defeat it instead, you could get cards back from being hollowed. But I'm pretty sure that enemy had victory.
Yeah, it was basically either get the victory and not have to fight him again, or everybody gets 1 card back.
Yeah.
And that never seemed good enough for me.
Yeah. So it's like one of those things that like I think each enemy that hollowed, you should have been able to get like if it hollowed 2, you got 1 back.
Yeah, something like that.
Even if it went on the top of your deck, so you still had to draw it, or you could hollow it again, right? Like, I think it needed something to really pop off, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of potential in this in the same way that like Teeches works, where messing with your deck can really be a threat in the campaign.
Yep.
But Teeches did it better because it's I don't know, it's punishing you once, not twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not like there's a card that's like search the top 5 cards of your deck for every Teeches in the search cards, take a horror or something like that.
Yeah. Or even if like hollows were kind of like the moon mechanic, where at the end of your turn you could like take a horror to like put it on the bottom of your deck or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. So there's a little more player control.
Yeah.
Because like if you're playing like, for example, a rogue big guns deck and your Beretta gets set aside, you're like, well, now I just have to wait 5, 6, 7 rounds until something shows up that lets me get it back.
Yeah. Apparently, yeah, there was also an evade to get a hollow back and a location that can bring him back. So there were other ways, but I think just not common enough for... I mean, like, hollow was more of a nuisance than it was, like Teeches, they're annoying, but they're also, like, kind of fun to play with, right? Hollows, not so much.
Yeah.
And even though I'm happy with like getting punished, there was that one scenario that if you lose it, you lose your highest XP hollow card and you don't get your experience back. I like the punishment, but I think you should be able to. I said that you should be able to get. You should be able to like still lose an experience card and you can't put it back in, but you get the experience back. I think there needs to be a little bit of a balance there. I love the idea of someone's deck getting disrupted and they need to like change gears. Like adaptation should be players should be able to want to adapt. Unfortunately, most of them don't, but that's a different conversation. But like you need to like if you're going to do that, you also have to like have a silver lining to go with it as well. It's a tough balance to hit.
That is also something that's difficult to balance between blind plays and replays.
Yep.
Like stuff you have to tech for. Like if you're playing through Dunwich the first time, you're going like, what the hell? These conglomeration of spheres are horrible. How am I supposed to deal with this? Mm-hmm. But then on a replay, you say, well, I can take a gun deck to Dunwich because I know it'll get work done with them and with the avian thrills later on.
Yeah,
like,
same with like swarming and dream eaters, right? Yeah.
So how much do you lean into that? Because it could make somebody's blind playthrough miserable and they never want to play again. Or it could, I don't know, make things too samey in the future.
Yeah.
It's a weird balance, and I'm not sure there's a right answer to that.
Yep, I agree. And I think, unfortunately, all these things lead to Scarlet Keys probably having the most universal bad blind play of all campaigns. Even worse than Forgotten Age. Because, like, Forgotten Age is difficult because I think, like, it's a tough blind bait because it's difficult, right? Scarlet Keys, I think it's just because there's so many, like... in terms of this map and like it's like other mechanics as we kind of just saw where we were like they're cool concepts but like they weren't really explored in a way that as tightly as previous mechanics were explored, and it kind of leads to like a perfect storm of what happens with Scarlet Keys.
Yeah, going back to other ones like Edge of the Earth, technically perfectly fine. The companions, take it or leave it, but it's not going to like ruin the campaign because they're there.
And Frost tokens were really good, right? Like I think Frost tokens are great.
Are really good. So that's like 2.5 out of 3 good things.
Yeah.
Each one of these is like
0.25.
Yeah, 0.25, half out of 1 at best. So you're getting like a grand total of 1 star for 4 mechanics here.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like you look at Innsmouth, and like Innsmouth, I think is bogged down a lot. Like if we talk about like the other mechanical identity, it's how you spend experience, but it is like two banger mechanics, right? Same with Dream Eaters, like two banger mechanics. Dream Eaters also has like there's like those campaign mechanics too, which is like 2 decks, which a lot of people don't like, which is fair. And like campaign length, a lot of people like longer campaigns, right?
Right.
It's like they all have their pros and cons. The unfortunate thing is just like as you said, like about like a 1-star overall for like these mechanics working in unison through the whole campaign, and it kind of hurts it.
So I think any of these could be revisited
Yes.
if they tune them up and probably reflavor them just so it doesn't have any of the lingering.
Yeah, that's something that Magic the Gathering does. They actually they will do a new mechanic, but if it was like poorly received, they'll adjust it and change the name completely. And everyone's like, "Hey, isn't that?" It's like, no, that's new. That's this new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could see any of these coming back in a different form that's more streamlined.
Yeah, man, the decoy is also great. The art is it is killer.
Really is, yeah.
Yeah, sweet. All right, well, Beard, that was really fun.
Yeah, it was a nice chat about the mechanics of the game. I guess it was like an unofficial campaign review as well.
Yeah, it was kind of. Yeah, we was talking about it. And I'd love to do it again when Hemlock is solid. We could definitely revisit it.
Yeah, I've only played 2 scenarios of Hemlock Holy Helicopter, so I'm not ready to discuss it, I'm afraid.
And I've also actually only played it 2 times, and I don't think, for me personally, 2 times is enough for me to really dive into the minutia of it yet. I feel like I need at least like 3 plays, and to also I like to read other people's opinions to also like use that to conflict and construct with my own opinions to see if like I'm actually believing it or if it's just like, you know, like if I'm just seeing it through not rose tinted glasses, but like, you know, nicer glasses than I should be looking at.
Yeah, and even the stuff that I have experienced, I haven't fully experienced yet.
Yeah.
'Cause I can't comment on the mechanic for the relationship with people because we haven't gotten any of them above like a 2 yet.
I have one simple question. Okay, we can answer this because you've interacted with the codex, right?
Yes, we have interacted with the codex, and I think it's just the scenario interludes with a new coat of paint.
Yeah.
Which is perfectly fine.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot. I want it. I'm happy if it exists. If it exists as it does, not in the preludes, because I think it's fine in the preludes on your blind play. But like for example in Lost Sister, which you did play, there was a codex I believe you could read when you interacted with one of the assets that were in play, right?
Yeah.
But like I like it more in the scenario when you can trigger it like once or twice, because it actually reminds me a lot of how the keys were triggered in Innsmouth. I like that view of the codex, and I want that to stay evergreen, but I don't want basically I don't want the preludes to stay evergreen. I don't think we need to see that again.
Yeah, they're fun time, but I don't think that I want to go through them again on every play of Hemlock Vale.
Yep. And also, of that note, there was a lot, every time this happens, once again, this is why I read all my opinions online to form thoughts. Every campaign, pretty much, they were like, we're going to see the exact same thing again. It's like, oh, we're going to see Explore next time. We're going to see Haunted next time. We're going to see 2 decks next time. We're going to see, like, Experience being the same, being fricked up next time. We're going to see giant maps next time. We're going to see completely open world next time. The designers also want to do new things. Like as a designer, right? You don't want to just do the same thing over and over and over again, right? Like even with your custom campaigns, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've tried to make none of them similar to each other. Otherwise, people are going like, oh, it's this scenario again. It's this campaign again.
Yeah. So like just because it happened, it doesn't mean it's going to happen again and again and again. We've actually like never had a direct repeat. I mean, honestly, I would wager even when they pitch these things, because they probably have to pitch it to somebody, there has to be like, they're like, so what's different? Like what are you bringing to the table this time?
Yep.
Yeah.
When I applied to Fantasy Flight, I think it was like 3 years ago now, I had to come up with a campaign pitch, and they basically asked me, all right, how is this going to be different than any other campaign we've done before?
Yeah.
What is going to draw people into buying this, even if it is their very first box?
Yeah. Yeah. So So yeah, I'm not too worried about, like, I understand, like, people, we say it because it's, you know, they're the newest opinions, but I'm confident that Drowned City is going to be quite different to Hemlock. Yeah.
I would agree.
Sweet.
Especially because I think they keep hiring more people for the team.
And yes.
And if you add 2-3 people and you're just making what was already made 7 or 8 years ago, then I don't think that's good for the future. But
exactly.
from everything I've seen so far, it's been great.
And also, like, more minds mean new things. This is something, like, I always, like, point to Magic, because it's the longest running card game for a reason, where they have different lead designers every, like, few sets. Like, they're like, so, like, they'll, like, one designer who led one set isn't going to lead or even work on the next set. Arkham doesn't have a team that big, but, like, it's that same kind of thing. Like, different perspectives will lead to new things, and I think that's going to happen here.
And they also have people helping out with every campaign that aren't on the design team. Like, I think every campaign says, like, campaign design by some person, because I know I first noticed it in Circle Undone, where they had somebody credited for, like, main campaign design, and I don't think they were credited in any other campaign before or since.
Yeah, there's a lot of more people involved than we think, essentially. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, my whole point of my channel is also just, like, why be upset or scared when we can be pogged out of our gourds instead? So I'm excited for Drowned City. I think it's going to be sick as hell.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, I'm biased because I like Innsmouth a lot, the same reason. I just like stuff associated with the sea. It's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I was thinking, I was lying in bed a few nights ago, and I was going to message you about this, but I was like, no, I'm not going to. Now that you're here, I was just like, what would happen if, like, they released, this would never happen, but if they released the Drowned City and it actually was just like a 1-for-1 of, like, Cyclopean Foundations. And I was just thinking about that. I'm like, that would be so wild. It'd be like, I was just thinking, like, it's just like, get to the first thing, like, wait a minute, I think I've played this before. And it's like, it's that same art that they just stole online. I was like, what the hell? I thought that would be a really weird experience.
At that point, this dude's got it.
Yeah. yeah. And speaking of, I've recently decided I want to get back into custom content on the channel. So if you don't know, I did an interview with Beard in the past about Cyclopean Foundations, which is a really awesome Cthulhu-themed and conspiracy-themed custom campaign. We've been meaning to do an interview about Alice, which is one of the old classics. We're going to be doing that again. I want to actually do that interview with you. But basically, I'm diving back into it. I'll have a link, if I remember, to the Cyclopean interview if you have played it. It's a very insightful interview, and Beard is a prolific designer for a reason. And I think if you haven't played Cyclopean, it would be this is like the perfect time to do it in anticipation of Drowned City as well. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the shout out there.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for all the content you made and all the content that you've helped me make. It's pretty sick.
I will continue to do so.
Hell yeah.
It's a fun time and a great privilege to help the channel.
Sweet. All right. Thank you for everyone who's watched, and to all of our patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to go further than just beyond liking the video, you can do so by joining our Patreon down in the video description. But still, I just lost it because I was reading chat. But thanks for everyone. Have a good one. And as always, GG's.